Okay, hello, and welcome back to Spiritual Lounge. Excuse me. Today's journey through the Upanishads is going to be pretty short. This is a very short section in the book, so probably no more than about 20-25 minutes at the most. The next one is slightly longer. It's like the Gnostic text. You have short chapters and segments, and you have very, very long ones. So let's move straight into what we're looking at today. So what we're looking at today is called the ultimate reality, Atman. The Atman is actually the spiritual self, as we'll go into now. Okay, so again, the Vedas, a large body of religious text, as we've discussed before many times. We won't go through this slide again. Excuse me. Every time I do these videos, I seem to cough, and I guess my voice seems to get worse. Okay, so the Atman, the spirit, is a spiritual life principle of the universe, the real self, the spirit, or the soul. So where the Brahman was the universe, or the creation, the absolute, Brahmanas, or Brahman, the Atman is the spiritual self, or the soul content, or spiritual self of us. And as the author continues in this chapter as a preface to the actual Upanishads themselves, says the word Atman is derived from to breathe, or the breath of life. It covers life, soul, self, or essential being. So essentially it's describing the divine spirit itself. Atman is the life principle. It's the breath, which is prana in Sanskrit. It's the intellect, which is prajna in Sanskrit, and it transcends them both. So breath is life, the intellect is the mind. Atman is what remains when everything that is not the self is eliminated. This means the ego, the mind, the physical senses, that of the cosmos, that of natural forces, everything that is of within the matter realm, in other words, is eliminated. The Rig Veda speaks of the unborn part. It describes the spirit as the unborn part, an unborn and so immortal element in man, not the self but its forms. Our true self is a pure existence, self-aware and unconditioned. We cast the self free from all outward events. There arises from the inward depths an experience, secret and wonderful. So when it talks about casting out in outward events, this means detaching oneself from the attachment to the external, the attachment to the physical, which is what also Buddhism asks us to follow. Buddhist teachings are based upon that principle. It is the miracle of self-knowledge, which is the Atmajnana in Sanskrit. The universe, the real, is Brahman, which is the absolute. The absolute dash Brahman is the overriding source representation. Form are only a play of manifestation, which is an accurate statement. So also the individual egos, they are all expressions of the one universal self. As Brahman is the eternal quiet underneath, Atman is the foundational reality. Conscious powers of the individual. Atman is the super reality of the jiva, which is the individual self, or the ego self. Which effectively means it's the true nature of the I, which is the spiritual breath, or the force within, is the real super reality of what we call our ego material matter self. Okay, the Chandogya Upanishads, which is one of the Upanishads I'm sure we'll go through, it mentions it quite a lot in this preface actually, so I'm assuming that the Upanishads, this particular Upanishad, of which there are many, that we'll be going through, seems to be a quite lengthy one, or one of the major pieces of text within it. I think we'll find. It gives us a story. So it talks about gods and demons who basically wanted to learn about the true nature of self and approached the Prajapati, which is the lord of an archetype representing lord of creatures. And the story maintains that the self is free from sin, old age, death, desires, and desires nothing, and the persisting spirit assumes that there is consciousness even in the apparently unconscious states. So effectively saying that the spirit never dies. It is the eternal self within us, and it assumes that the consciousness there is a consciousness beneath what is apparently our unconscious externally, which is what it means by apparently unconscious states. The first suggestion is that the self is the image that we see in the eye. This is explained a little bit further on in another slide, and what that is talking about. What's the term that we often hear that the seat of the soul is through the eyes? You can see what someone is by looking into their eyes. We can deceive materially. We can deceive through actions, through our physical bodies. We can come across, even through facial features, to deceive a person. But if you look within the eye of an individual, deep within the eye of an individual when you speak to them, you can see whether there's deceit or whether there's honor or truth. You can see whether there's love or whether there's hate. You can see all the truth that's within. You can also see whether a person is operating within a state of love, for love essence from the spirit, or that they've detached from that and are operating within a darkness state, away from divine force, and have chosen an opposite direction for themselves. This is all within the eye, and this is what this is saying. You can see the spirit through the eye, which you can actually. The second suggestion is that the true self is he who moves about happy in dreams. In other words, detached from the physical self. They do say there is a suggestion that in dreams, our spiritual self doesn't completely detach from the body, because if it did, the body would die, because the spirit actually animates. So the golden thread between us and our fractal of our force is always in situ. But it suggests that the spirit roams, returns to the divine realm in some aspect of itself. And I think that's what this is suggesting. Another suggestion is the self is the consciousness in deep sleep. It is in deep sleep, I would suggest, in the majority of humanity who are not in touch with their divine selves. If they were, humanity wouldn't be in the state it's in today, would it? That's clearly the evidence for that statement I'm making. But it's also evidential in the way we are in the last couple of years and the way we've operated in our awareness and perceptions of the true reality of what our world truly is and what governs it. And unless, I would say, we're all asleep, and the spirit is never asleep, it's igniting within us. I would say that it's a dimly lit flame within many of us. So then, therefore, the self within is in a deep sleep, because the flame within it is not being ignited by us reconnecting to it, which then awakens us to the awakened force of the light within as well. So I would say we're asleep, and we suppress the divine spirit within us into a dimly lit light, which could say we're putting that spirit to sleep as well. The final reality is the active universal consciousness, which is not to be confused with the ether, with ether or the body. Other forms belong to objectified being. This is true. This is saying that the forms that we see are there because we see them through our senses. They're objectified by our being. There's 5 senses that we have. We see things as real, we touch and we interact with them. They're an obstruction. Remember we discussed before that things come into force when they hit an obstruction. An obstruction is also perception. If we see something and our senses perceive it to be real, we'll react with it as through that perceptual force of it being real. It's energy, an opposing force, for a vibration of energy meeting another vibration of energy, therefore it would feel physical. Self is the knowing subject. It's the self being the spiritual self. Self is the light of lights. Well, I quite like that statement. It is perpetual, abiding light, neither lives nor dies, the constant witness of consciousness. In the Vesvanara, it says the Upanishads also state there are 4 kinds of soul. Again, these are abstractions. They're good for understanding and awareness, because we'll probably come across these terms again. But it says Vasvanara, which is the experiencer of gross things. Gross things means physical things. Not when it mentions gross, it doesn't mean they're horrible or disgusting. Remember, the words are used in different ways back in the time when some of these texts were written. Gross means physical things. Tejasa is of subtle things; those are not so physical. Prana is the unmanifested, so the Tejasa could mean that which is spiritual, if you like, energetic. The Prana is the unmanifested, that which is within the unseen, and Turiya, which is the supreme self, which is connecting with the divine force itself, or our supreme self within. The Mandukya Upanishads says there's 4 modes of consciousness. It's the waking, the dream, the deep sleep, and the illumined consciousness. And it states that the illumined consciousness is the last one, but is the combination of the first 3, which kind of makes logical sense. Okay, it is suggested that the supreme intelligence who dwells in the sleeping state holds all things in an unmanifested condition. I agree with this because this is what it's saying that the source is. And my perception is stating that the source is an emptiness. It's a void of pure consciousness. It's a void of pure presence and being, pure possibility and probability. There's nothing actually in it, but everything's within it. And it holds all things in unmanifested condition until there's an intention or thought that manifests that thing into an offspring of being. Nothing in our lives comes into state unless we intend it or think for it to be coming into state, which then inspires an action, a word, or a thought into being. This is the same for the divine supreme force or source, our divine grace itself. The origin of all things is intent and thought, coming out of a void of infinite possibility and probability of energetic force, presence, intent, consciousness, whatever you want to call it. It's a voidness. It's a void that expresses all things, and this is what this means. In the sleeping state holds all things in an unmanifested condition. Divine wisdom sees all things not as human, but in original reason. In treatise on yoga, so he's talking about the writings of yoga, the potential all consciousness of the state of sleep is represented in the form of a radiant serpent called kundalini or vag. Vag is snake Devi. So many of you will have heard of people working on meditative practices, working on the visualizing energetic color going up and down their spinal column. And they're working on releasing what's known as kundalini energy. This is where this comes from. Yoga consists in rousing the radiant serpent, and that's what these those who practice those yogic practices of kundalini or release of kundalini are doing just that. They talk about radiant serpent. They talk about light, different colors of light being radiated, and feeling it and visualizing it running up and down the spine from the base of where you sit right up to the top there, just below the skull. From the lowest, so it's moving the force from the lowest part up to the heart union, right up to the cerebral cortex, if you like, which is then calling a union with the prana, and it's called an opening of the Brahma or cosmic organism, in other words. So if you speak to yogis or anyone who practices yoga seriously, they'll probably mention this. And there's a small section at the end of this chapter called The Ultimate Reality at Atman, which is again continuing on with it. It says, in the early prose, Upanishads, Atman is the principle of the universal consciousness, and Brahman is the super personal ground of the cosmos. This is what we've already covered. Soon the distinction diminishes. I would say that's describing as we move into a more ascended states of awareness and perception, our spiritual self starts to integrate further into the frequency of the Absolute. Brahman, the first principle of the universe, is known through Atman, the inner self of man, which is true. we achieve, we understand what the absolute Brahman is through the internal spirit, which is the Atman force. The Chandogya Upanishads, again mentioned, said, this whole world is Brahman. This soul of mine within the heart, this is Brahman, a person who is seen in the eye. Atman, so this is the spirit seen through the eye. The Atman, that is Brahman. God is transcendent and utterly beyond the world, and man, it lives in him. And Narayana, which is a supreme being as a foundation of humanity, is another archetype. States is the God of man. Is the God of man in constant association with Nara, the human being. So it's saying the supreme force is in constant connection with us. It's an immortal dwelling in the mortal being human, immortal being the supreme absolute. We become superior to all cosmic existence by entering into the world, transcending consciousness, effectively talking about spiritual ascent and practice into that movement, which is why we watch, why I do this, and well, I guess you guys are watching this video as well. And I think that brings us to the end of this very, very short summary chapter of what we're going through. So again, the second coming, remember, practice this, because it's a waiting for yourself, to ourselves, to become what it is that we're trying to reach through our practices and whatever stepping stones we wish to move along during our journey, and to become that, not just practice it when it suits us or when we need something. You have to become the journey if it's truly going to have any essence to it at all. And again, this is the book that I wrote some time ago, which you can purchase if it's of interest to you, which gives us a foundational information that I wrote, which covers off a lot of things that we talk about. Okay, I want to say thank you very much, guys, for listening to this very short video. It's much shorter than the previous ones. The next one I think is longer, but not immensely long. We'll soon get to the Upanishads themselves, and I want to say thank you again for listening to this and giving me your time. It's much appreciated, and God bless you all until next time. Thank you.